There he is. Welcome, Michael Huber.
Afternoon.
Okay, I think we're ready to start, and I will begin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I welcome you all to a meeting of the Inspector General Advisory Board, which is convened pursuant to Article 10, Section 2 of the City Charter, as the Advisory Board discharges its obligation to review the performance of the Inspector General as set forth in Article 10, Section 2F. I'd like to begin by reminding everyone that this meeting is being broadcast on Charm TV and is being recorded so that it can be viewed later on. In addition, should you wish to watch the meeting with closed captioning, you can do so on Charm TV's Facebook page, which can be accessed at facebook.com/Charm TV Baltimore /. I am Jim Shea, and I am by charter the chairman of this advisory board. And I'd like to begin simply by having each of the board members introduce themselves, but lest I appear to be something less than appropriate, let me begin by saying we are honored to have the Inspector General herself, Isabel Cumming, here with a couple of her staff members. So I won't introduce you first, in a sense, but we'll give you a chance in a few minutes. But go ahead. Can we start with Councilman Costello? You're on mute. Yep, there. You're still on mute. This gives us a chance to work out all our bugs. I'll tell you what, we'll pass on Costello for a second and go to Michael Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
My name is Michael Huber. I am Mayor Scott's Chief of Staff. Thank you.
All right, and Ms. McClamey?
Good afternoon, Erica McClamey in the Office of the Controller.
Can't quite hear you, Erica.
Can you again? Okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Erica McClamey, Office of the Controller.
Okay. Then Vice President Middleton.
Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Green Middleton. I serve as Vice President of the Council, and I also represent the 6th Councilmatic District. And today is my wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Dean Tobin.
Hi, Donald Tobin, and I'm the Dean at the University of Maryland Carey School of Law, and pleased to be here.
And Dean Weich.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Weich. I'm the Dean of the University of Baltimore School of Law.
And we'll return to Councilman Costello. We're still not hearing anything, Councilman. Try it one more time.
Is there a call number?
Is there? I don't think there is a call-in number.
Let me see if we can work on that and see if we can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you now. Victory.
Eric Costello, City Councilman, 11th District. Thank you, Mr. Solicitor.
Okay, it makes me feel so good that we can overcome technological barriers here. That's a very good start. Well, let me begin just very briefly. This is an opportunity for us to hear from the Inspector General herself. It's her chance to provide us with her own self-evaluation and to direct us to what we should be reviewing and consider the factors that she believes are relevant and material. I will give her an opportunity in a second to make an opening statement, and then we will have questions from board members, enabling her to respond to those questions to educate us as to how the Inspector General operates. And let me hasten to say, since this is the first time any of the board members have done a review of the Inspector General, we may well, and I certainly will, ask questions that are very basic, simply trying to understand how things operate so that we can put everything into the right context. In short, we're here to listen and learn. But enough from me, apropos of that statement. Let's turn it over to Inspector General Cumming.
Good afternoon, Chairman Shea, members of the Inspector General Advisory Board, and citizens watching from home. My name is Isabel Mercedes Cumming, and with me today are the Deputy Inspector General for Administration, Yvonne Brooks, and the Deputy Inspector General for Investigations, Michelle Phillips. I was appointed the 5th Inspector General of Baltimore in January 2018. My education experience includes a master's in business and a Juris Doctorate. I earned both degrees at night while working full-time here in Baltimore City. My professional background includes a decade of auditing, 2 decades as a financial crimes prosecutor, and 1 decade of Inspector General work in both Baltimore and Washington, D.C. I am the first female and the first Hispanic to ever hold this position. In November of 2018, the citizens of Baltimore voted overwhelmingly to make the office of Inspector General independent. And since taking that office, our team has worked tirelessly to earn the citizens' trust and confidence, knowing that their complaints would be heard objectively and evaluated that way without any undue influence, bias, or politics. And after the law went into effect, I immediately asked when the advisory board would meet. And despite my and others' attempts, the advisory board never convened over the next 3 fiscal years. However, the OIG forged ahead, and both the budget and our annual reports were always submitted on time, and the performance benchmarks outlined by the office were consistently met or exceeded. And I'd like to talk a little bit about performance. The Oig Performance Metrics are detailed in our most recently released annual report, which is found on our homepage. Highlights include fielding more than 700 complaints for the 2nd year in a row and identifying more than $7 million in waste and savings in the past fiscal year. And overall, since taking office, our team has received more than 1,800 complaints, authored more than 120 reports, and documented savings and waste of more than $11 million. We've also added web ethics and whistleblower oversight to the office, resulting in over 1,000 calls alone to help with financial disclosures. The ethics disclosures are back online and available for anyone to review, and our team remains diligent and will continue to root out waste and fraud. In late May of this year, though, we learned the advisory board would be meeting in July, 32 months after the 2018 law passed. And that law mandated that the advisory board embrace 4 main functions. The first 2 are 1, to keep the OIG budgetary process free from political influence by having the advisory board present the budget directly to the Board of Estimates, and 2, complete the annual performance review of the Inspector General. Now, neither of these 2 items has ever been completed, yet the team kept moving forward in the absence of a board. And during the last budget process, I again had to present my board to City Council Budget Committee, which happens to have 2 members on this board. And regarding oversight, before even the first advisory board meeting, the OIG had requested and has been accepted for a professional peer review by the Association of Inspector Generals, and that's scheduled for next year. Now, this is important because that's a national peer review which provides an independent review for an Inspector General's performance. But earlier this year, and prior to the first meeting of the Baltimore City Advisory Board, a new bill was put forth in Baltimore County. And that bill sought to add an advisory board and limit the powers of their Inspector General. The proposed makeup of the County Advisory Board was just like this board, with 5 elected or appointed government employees and 2 members of higher education. In a matter of just 3 business days, the bill was withdrawn, due to major public outcry and criticism. And recently, a Baltimore County Council person who was one of the most critical of the Inspector General wrote in her newsletter, "It's clear that any oversight board cannot be comprised of political appointees or anyone that may find themselves in front of the Inspector General." The Baltimore County Executive now agrees with her and is saying going forward, no county workers or elected officials will be on their advisory board. And the situation in Baltimore County solidified my concerns that the city's 2018 law concerning the IG Advisory Board had major flaws. Some of the flaws are becoming evident, while others have been hidden. And again, these issues were not previously highlighted because there was never an opportunity. Again, the concern is not and was never the qualifications of each board member here. Rather, it's an issue of independence from politics and influence. See, Baltimore City stands alone in a departure from national best practices. In a review of 25 independent state and local inspector general offices from around the country, only 7 had advisory boards. And of those 7, only 2 had any elected or politically appointed officials on the advisory board. But only Baltimore City has an advisory board made up exclusively of elected or appointed government employees. Now, asking the law school deans to join can only happen when 2 elected officials, the mayor and the city council president, agree to the arrangement. And I am grateful that they are on this board. Now, the operation of Baltimore City State's Attorney, Baltimore City OIG has been recognized as a national success story. The Bloomberg Group asked me to testify regarding the formation of an independent OIG in Atlanta. And they considered the Baltimore OIG a model to emulate. Atlanta mirrored much of what we developed operationally in Baltimore. However, the board makeup was rejected. Instead, they decided on a composition of 9 people from the ranks of citizen leaders, professional groups, and education leaders. None can work for the city of Atlanta or have matters within the jurisdictional oversight of the Office of the Inspector General. Now, when citizens voted for OIG independence in 2018, it was thought citizens were voting to make this office free from interference of any political nature. So let me be very clear. No OIG complainant should hesitate in making a complaint or ever having to worry whether their complaint concerning a member of this board will be handled objectively and without prejudice. Nor should any complainant fear retaliation simply because the person or reporting stream they may be complaining about sits on or has influence with this board. Public should never wonder if a report is biased or fully accurate because the subject of an investigation sits on or is influenced by a member of this board. No citizen should be concerned whether a future Inspector General has the fortitude to stand up or investigate their own board. The Inspector General's office cannot disclose a conflict because the OIG will not breach confidentiality or disrupt the integrity of our investigative process. And over the past few years, the Office has investigated cases with individuals or departments whose positions are represented on this advisory board. Of the more than 120 reports, all but 1 impacted the departments or positions of the people sitting on this board. So there's an inherent flaw in the Baltimore model. Now, the 2 remaining functions of this board are 1, to remove the current Inspector General for 1 of 3 reasons listed in the law, or 2, the next one, to select the next Inspector General. Now, these 2 points highlight the additional flaws of Baltimore's advisory board model. This board is inherently a political board. The OIG is and expected to be one that avoids political influence. It's important to note that in November of 2020, a ballot initiative passed naming the Inspector General as the only non-political official authorized to initiate proceedings to remove the mayor, the city council president, any council member, or the comptroller. Each one of those positions is represented on this board. If an Inspector General were to be removed by this board, political motives may rightfully be suspected. The implications of an elected officials choosing their own watchdog are unmistakable. I look forward to completing the remaining 3 years of my term and working with an advisory board to ensure the future success of the Inspector General's office. We share a responsibility to leave things better than we find them. The issues I raise now are so the law can be corrected for the future Inspector General. And I sincerely clarify the issues for this board and for the public. Again, to remedy these flaws, Baltimore citizens have the power to put this correction on the next ballot with only 10,000 signatures. And I recommend that occurs in November of 2022. But let me leave you with these words from the late Baltimore City Congressional Representative Elijah Cummings, who served for years as a ranking member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. While discussing the importance of Inspector Generals at a congressional reform hearing on IG oversight, he called for the support of Inspector Generals, saying, quote, "We will protect whistleblowers, we will protect government employees, and we will protect those who want to make our government the best it can be." He went on to state that when employees are afraid, Inspector Generals are, quote, "the last line of defense." So I thank you for your time, and we'll be happy, my team, both Michelle and Yvonne, will be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, thank you very much, Inspector General. Let me begin. I've taken the chairman's prerogative to go first. And again, my questions will be basic, but my focus is on doing what I'm assigned to do under the charter, which is to understand the IG's office and try to offer some constructive help by way of feedback. So let me begin by saying that I have looked at various bodies, including the Inspector General's nonprofit, as well as the federal government, which of course has 150 some inspectors general throughout its ranks. And from that study, it looks to me like there are three potential functions of an inspector general. One is to investigate complaints. The second is entitled inspection and evaluation. And the third is audit. Now, I think I understand what number one is, inspection of complaints, but the second one, inspection and evaluation, is not immediately obvious to me. Could you, that means?
Of course. Great question. Thank you. I think the last one you were going to talk about was audit. And so I just want to let you know that when my office was formed, that was completely taken off the table. I have no audit function whatsoever.
Okay.
So we were formed as only an investigation group. We follow what's known as the Green Book. So there's different types of inspector generals. And knowing when I started, I had 10 pins, as we call them. We decided to focus on what really needed to occur, which was a strong investigation team. And I do have that Michelle Phillips is in charge of investigations. Now, we would like in the future to have an evaluation group. And I'm actually going to turn it over right now to Yvonne Brooks, because this is one of her pet things that she would really like to do, but we just haven't had enough ability. So Yvonne, he wants to talk about evaluations.
Yes, Chairman Shea. So the way the offices are set up, you can have all three or four of those functions. You can have one. There are some inspector general's offices that just have the audit function across the country. So here, even though we are statutorily auditized to have an evaluations function, the investigations have taken precedent, mainly due to evidence, right, or witnesses, or they're either going to be here as an employee, they quick. So we're really trying to get to those complaints. But eventually, if we have the resources and opportunity to move towards evaluations, and that's more like a going into a department and, for lack of a better term, reviewing maybe a process or policy, so that way it can inform the department head, the city council, like, okay, we've taken a look at this, we can see kind of where the process is broken, which is a little bit different from audit because they're very specific. They do statistical sampling where evaluations would look at one particular policy or one particular process throughout the entire durations and create a report based on that.
Good, thank you. That's very helpful. Under the charter, in Article 10, Section 3, our Inspector General is to investigate complaints of waste, fraud, and abuse. And your annual reports, I think all of them, but including the most recent one, repeat that in effect, saying that the mandate, and I'm now quoting from your annual report, of rooting out fraud, waste, and abuse of the city's financial resources. In your 2020 annual report, those same items were listed, but the report added corruption and conflict of interest. Inspector General, what is the basis for the addition of those two other items?
Well, at the current time, I'm actually now the ethics director for the city. So ethics, conflicts of interest is a big part of what we do there. Corruption is just another form of fraud. I mean, it's right in the beginning of the charter that we are, our jurisdiction includes elected officials. So usually if something involves an elected official, sometimes they consider that just corruption. So since we're looking at waste, fraud, abuse, it falls squarely within the corruption reign as well.
Your annual report does focus on financial waste, fraud, and abuse. Accurate?
A lot of what we do is also some of it is it's tips that come in through the office. So it as opposed to we had to put financial waste because people were calling about like their trash and people weren't picking up waste. So we had to, that's why we added financial waste. So it's when it hits at the dollar line, the money.
You did indicate in your reports that you're not investigating employment complaints, again, unless they involve financial matters.
That's
based on the same policy that you just articulated, correct?
Well, actually, sometimes like with the last line of defense, and when it's usually we work very strongly with HR, but sometimes if what we're investigating has to be HR, then we end up doing an investigation because I think it was 2000. Michelle, you might be able to help me on this one. Actually, I think you did it. We did an investigation concerning HR.
Did it involve financial waste?
Michelle?
So it was 2018, I believe,
Okay.
the first year that the Inspector General had started, and we were asked to investigate certain issues when it comes to department heads within city government, just because the complainant didn't want to feel that there was some type of bias going on. In some agencies will ask, some administrations will ask us directly to investigate different cases or different allegations, either because they do not have the bandwidth to do so, or they want to do it in tandem. And it may be that an individual's abuse of power or mismanagement will result in fraud, waste, and abuse in some way, form, or fashion. So we will vet those out, triage those cases, and discuss with the rest of the agency partners to see who's best suited and available with the bandwidth to go ahead and continue those investigations so those complaints do not fall by the wayside. So.
Now, you've indicated in your annual reports and alluded to it today that your process typically begins with a complaint, and you investigate the complaint. What is the basis? At some point, I assume you would determine whether you're going to continue or take the investigation on as a preliminary matter or not. What is the basis that you use for making that preliminary determination to whether or not to pursue an investigation?
Thanks for giving us the opportunity to answer this question, because this is one that we get a lot. And I'm going to let Michelle basically go through the investigative process, how it starts from tips and go through. So,
well, I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of walk through it so I can understand each piece.
That's what we're going to do.
Okay, well, the first piece is how do you figure out whether to take on an investigation or not?
Chairman Shea, so once we get the complaint through the hotline, I'll go ahead through the investigation, see if it falls under the purview of the OIG. So does it have to do with fraud, waste, abuse in city government or with anybody who does business with the city? And then once we sit there and look at that, we'll see if the allegations have any supporting documentation, as long as we can see that it falls under our purview. Are they allegations that we can potentially take a look at, or are they blanketed matters? Like we may get an allegation that the Office of the Inspector General is wasting money. What money? You know, is there a particular grant? Is there a particular contract? Is there a particular project that you're talking about, so that we kind of can funnel it in and we can go ahead and start triaging that way. And once we determine that, we meaning myself, because I do the vetting of the hotline, I'll bring it to Yvonne and Isabel to take a look at it and say, this looks like this could potentially be a viable investigation. There may be some more preliminary digging that we need to do, and we'll come to a consensus, and the Inspector General will say, yes, this looks like something that we can move forward with, or potentially refer it out to another investigative entity, or an agency that may potentially be outside of the city government. So that's the first piece.
Good, good. And you've anticipated my question. Who makes that preliminary decision, Ms. Phillips? It sounds like it's you, the Inspector General, and is there anyone else involved in that?
Yes. So Yvonne Brooks.
Okay, very good. And does that assessment involve more than just looking at the complaint, presumably a written or oral complaint? Do you, for example, have an interview with the complainant? Let's just start with that.
Absolutely. So sometimes we'll have complainants that know exactly what the issue is, everything. They'll send it to us via email. We'll have all the supporting documentation, and we may not need to follow up with them. A lot of anonymous complainants are that way. They don't want us to contact them anymore. There's also an option to do an intake interview, which means that we can do that with the pandemic virtually, and we'll have two investigators or OIG agents to go ahead and do that. It'll give us the opportunity to gather additional information as well as supporting documentation, emails, voicemail, anything that may support their allegations in that way. Additionally, we'll do some preliminary investigation on our end. If there's some applications that we have access to, we can start pulling or requesting documentation from financial areas such as BVMR or payroll if there are allegations regarding that, procurement as well. So yes, we do start, and I'll gather up that information and I'll go ahead and present that to the Inspector General and the Deputy Inspector General of Administration.
Does this preliminary investigation ever involve asking the target or the subject of the complaint or that person's agency to provide context at that point?
Yes. So one thing I will say is that we have had allegations come up that seem a little bit far-fetched, or some that may already sit in an agency. So there may be a potential issue. I've called, actually last week I called an agency and asked, hey, you know, we have this, can I get some context on this? Because I only have bits and pieces of this information. Or if there's an investigative body that sits within that agency, I'll ask if they have any open and ongoing investigations without giving too much detail as far as the complainant information to see, because we don't want to duplicate efforts. And sometimes if that investigation is going forward, we will defer and allow that investigative entity to continue on. They are more than welcome to help ask us to assist. So we definitely don't want to step on toes, and we don't want to duplicate efforts. So yes, sir, at times we will reach out to the agency.
Does the preliminary investigation ever involve speaking to the actual person about whom the complaint is made?
So as of right now, I cannot recall if there has been a time that we have actually reached out to a specific subject of a complaint to let them know what the complaint is.
Well, you can continue to think about that. I'm
Yes.
asking these questions off the cuff. If you remember some, please let us know. Now, is there a strategic plan for the office, Ms. Inspector General? Do you have an overall strategic plan?
And what do you mean by that?
Well, when you're doing this preliminary assessment, if you had a strategic plan, it would enable you to prioritize that this complaint about this subject is high on my list because I have a priority that I've already established for where I want the office and the city to go.
So you're asking me if we have a strategic plan for the future, or are you asking about
Yeah.
when we get the cases?
No, I'm asking about a general strategic plan for the future.
To be the best Inspector General office in the United States.
No. The question is, do you have a strategic plan that would direct or prioritize you in picking which cases to pursue and how to devote your limited resources to the thing that's the highest priority?
That's not usually the way it works. It's not, we get cases and then we meet and evaluate. They go from different steps. They go from the hotline to the preliminary evaluation to determining whether it's an investigation. And then we have to determine which, we have several agents. We determine each agent's caseload, whether they can get a new position, or we have to put that particular investigation on the pending list, because we have pending investigations and we have active investigations. And so that is something that every week we get an update that lists all our investigations, because we have so many different investigations in different levels. I mean, right now I believe Michelle can correct me, but I think we have at least 30 active investigations and at least 20 some pending investigations. We also list the ones that are in public synopsis status. We list the ones that are in, we're waiting for information because we already sent out a referral. Because when Michelle talks about the referrals, you have to realize it's not like we just refer something. I refer something and I give you a date and I want it back in that amount of time. So we have all these different things that every single week we sit, we discuss, and it's fluid. I mean, it's
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. When I take it from time to time, you decline to pursue.
But I will say, if we have something that's a tremendous dollar amount or something like that, we could prioritize it, or if it's a situation, we can do it week to week. I mean, believe me, we're flexible and we're a fluid group.
Okay. I take it from time to time, you decline to pursue complaints that you've received. Is that right?
Michelle, can you think of only if it's not within our jurisdiction, of course we would decline that. If it's not.
I think, excuse me, but I think Ms. Phillips said that sometimes you find that there's no support.
Oh, yeah, if there's not a case there, but that we wouldn't have declined the initial complaint. It reaches a point when we decline it in our process, but we would never just say we're not doing that right from the beginning.
No, that's
we
fair.
always have to
But
evaluate.
you decline to pursue an investigation having given it a preliminary look. Is that
Well,
right?
I mean, we always, if it's not something that we would normally do, we do, like Michelle said, a referral. And we still would expect, if we can't do the case, we don't want to let any citizens who trusted us with their situation. So then I, as the Inspector General, will do a referral and ask the department, DPW, DOT, whatever, ask them to get back to us within 3 to 4 weeks about what has been done about a situation that may not be one that we can do, but needs to be addressed. Is that?
Well, yes,
Okay.
that's responsive in part. And I think we've already, I don't want to go back over what we've already talked about. There are times when you feel as though the complaint is not well-founded or not within your jurisdiction or requires a referral. There are a variety of reasons that you might not pursue an in-depth investigation. My question to you is, do you keep a record even of those preliminary decisions?
Yep.
All of them.
We have something called CMTS, which we have when everything is involves, like our thing says, we've gotten over 1,800 complaints, and everything is data driven. So we keep very detailed records. And Michelle, again, knows this far better than me because she is the keeper.
Good.
So Michelle, can you answer that one with?
Well, I think you have. Inspector General, that
We don't want detail.
certainly answered it to my satisfaction. Maybe others will ask you again.
Okay.
Notice on your investigations, each that I've seen, and I'm only seeing the public synopsis at the end of the line, each seems to have a number. At what point is a number assigned to a particular complaint?
Actually, you are one of the people that actually gets copies of the real reports every time. So, you know, there's a public synopsis, but we actually send the report to, you actually do get the actual report. So as far as the
The question was about the numbers. When is the number assigned?
Right. So Michelle?
So every complaint that we receive, whether it is a complaint that falls under the purview of the Office of the Inspector General or not, receives a complaint number. That number will have a C at the end of it. Any investigation that is initiated from a complaint will have an I number at the end of it. So that is how those numbers are generated, Chair.
Very, very helpful.
Yes,
Now,
sir.
when you have completed the preliminary assessment and you've decided to do an investigation, do you have a plan of investigation for each complaint that you're pursuing?
So I'll go ahead and answer that. We do have an investigative plan document. Once the Inspector General, myself, and Yvonne Brooks, the DIGA, have established that that is what we will do, I will initiate an investigation, which will have an I number at the end, assign it to an agent, sit down with that agent, and put together an investigative plan. Now, investigative plans are fluid as we continue to uncover information. Then that means that the tide of the investigation may change, or we may think that the allegation may be substantiated or not. We have no clue. We allow the evidence to guide us within that investigation.
Do you have a written set of procedures for how interviews are to be conducted?
Well, the Office of the Inspector General actually has policies and procedures, 92 pages worth of them. So there is a section on interviews. There is a section on, I could actually read down the list, just like this, their policy and procedural manual. And we cover all the different things that you were discussing.
Okay. How is the interview information maintained? Is it recorded? Are there notes? How is that done?
Michelle, I'll let you take that.
So at the inception of every interview, we have a document that we have for every witness or anybody who is giving information or being interviewed by the Office of the Inspector General. We ask if they are okay with us audio recording the interview so that nothing is misconstrued. We gather their consent, And then we go ahead and let them know that it is a voluntary interview and we will be gathering information pursuant to an open and ongoing investigation. That can be utilized in any administrative hearings, criminal hearings, or disciplinary hearings, or civil moving forward. We also get their written consent. If it is in person, they'll go ahead and sign that document. If it is not, we'll go ahead and ask of their approval on record if it is a virtual interview.
Do witnesses decline? Do they decline to be recorded?
There is the option to decline. And if
No, but the question is, how do they actually decline? And if so, how often?
I've been here 3 years and I've only had on 2 instances the same person that we had to interview decline.
Okay.
He was the only person who would. So in that instance, we would go ahead and utilize our notes and make sure that we have copious notes. Those notes will be scanned and uploaded to the case management system.
How many interviewers do you have per interview?
We will have 2, depending on if it is a male or female. If there's a female interviewee, we will ensure that there is a female agent or female staff member who is there to make sure that there's comfortability in there. So there will be 2 for safety reasons.
Do you keep all of the recordings of witness interviews?
The process and procedure is once we conclude the interview, we go ahead and upload it directly to CMTS.
And I take it you collect documents as well in your investigation.
Yes, sir.
Are those also kept, all the documents you collect pursuant to an investigation?
Yes. So we'll go ahead and gather those documents, scan them into CMTS. Some documents may be relevant at the time that we garner them, and then sometimes we'll review them and be like, this is exactly not what we need. So then we'll make sure that the pertinent relevant documentation is uploaded, and then the other documents are stored as evidence in our storage.
Okay. Now, your annual report talks about coordinating with other agencies, and some of them are city agencies. And I want to ask you a little bit about the coordination. Starting with the Department of Law. But before I begin questioning you, let me say that my experience with your office and coordinating with it has been excellent. In particular, Brian Barsh and Jeff Hotsteller have been enormously cooperative and helpful. So I congratulate you, Ms. Inspector, on 2 very good hires. And I'm suspecting that in Ms. Phillips and Ms. Brooks, you have 2 other very good hires. So that's terrific. When you coordinate with the law department, do you ask for an analysis of legal issues that you encounter during your investigation?
Every case we do is really different from each. So there have been instances where we do ask for that. If we're speaking of people that do a really good job, Michael Schrock, Hillary Ruley, I mean, there's some people on your staff as well, and that have really made our life a lot easier. Gary Gilkey. I mean, the analysis that we have done through the years, because I mean, I've been back since Judge Andre Davis and Dana Moore. We've worked closely with the law department on some issues, but every case is different. So some cases won't have that. And I think it's important that, you know, we definitely have an office here that we don't know what's going to happen from day to day. I mean, I do have an incredibly great staff and we have great procedures, but every day we don't know what the different case could be. So
How many investigators, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
just, you know, the talent in my office and the reason the office has been so successful is because of the people that work here. So thank you.
How many investigators do you have on staff?
Michelle, how many right now do we have?
So as of right now, we have 5.
And are any of them lawyers?
1.
And
And Yvonne is a lawyer too. Yvonne is a lawyer as well.
and
She
who
was
is the other lawyer?
prosecutor.
I promise I won't try to recruit them to the law department.
One of our special agents. One of our special agents he obtained his law degree was, I think, last year.
He did.
He passed the bar earlier this year.
And Ms. Brooks, his name is?
We can't tell people who, for the longest time, everybody thought I was the Office of the Inspector General. We're very careful of who works in this office because we have
Okay.
undercover work.
Fair
We
enough. All right. And I didn't mean to transgress because we
had to see his best jump with that one.
all right. Very good.
But they're the best.
All right. And so leaving aside names,
Mhm.
how many other lawyers are there in your office?
There's 3.
3 in all? I won't ask their names.
Well, you know,
Probably,
I'm one.
probably about 50 years experience though.
Okay. Now, another agency with which you coordinate is DHR. And I take it from time to time you will ask DHR for relevant administrative manual provisions. Do you not?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, do you also ask for DHR's interpretation of the provisions they're providing you?
Yes.
Okay. And what other agencies do you ask for administrative manual provisions or other legal provisions? And the same question as to them, do you ask for their interpretation?
I think we've asked the Office of the Labor Commission
Mhm.
for guidance on certain issues, and I think that's the ones I've reached out to a lot, as well as Gary Gilkey on some employment issues.
Okay.
Plus the police department, we've reached out to their lawyers. We have definitely reached out a lot to interpretation for DPW, correct, Michelle?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Any others?
During-
can think?
Yeah.
DOT?
Well,
Okay.
again,
Just-
feel free to supplement if you think of others. But when you get an interpretation from an agency, any of them, including law, do you keep the interpretation that they've given you in your files?
Yes.
Okay.
It would be anything we get on a case, we should keep the material.
All right. Now, during the course of your investigations, do you have a give and take, an exchange of information with the subject of the complaint?
Depends on the case.
What does it depend on?
Depends if the subject may be going to have criminal cases and then we don't. It depends on each individual case. We really would evaluate step by step what type of investigative way we would handle it.
So I take it from that there are cases in which you do not have a give and take with the subject.
Now, Michelle, can you think of?
Can you provide some clarity? What do you mean give and take with the subject?
Well, let me ask you, for each investigation, you specify issues that you're interested in pursuing. I assume that's part of your plan, correct?
Now, we usually have a complaint about a situation, and we're usually pretty focused on a situation.
But the situation has given rise to an issue or a series of issues, I assume.
It could, depending on the issue.
Okay.
I mean,
When
I think if you should realize that, I mean, if you just look, on the different types of cases, I mean, we had like one where we had someone that looked at 4,000 images of porn he had on his thing. We have other ones that store. I mean, there's such a variety here.
Well, there are cases in which you do identify issues and present them to the subject. Is that right?
I can speak for the whistleblower program, Chairman Shea, where it is important because of the nature of that type of allegation. We do tend to speak to the subjects in those types of cases probably more than once, but that's because it's whistleblower.
But there are cases in which you do not describe the issues to the subject. And the question is, what is it about those questions that those cases that prevent you from disclosing the issues?
The only instance when that will happen is if the investigation that we receive will potentially go criminal. Moving forward, and as we continue to fine tune the process, we have given or will give subjects the opportunity to answer to the allegations that have been brought before them if we feel as though it kind of rises to that level. So we may go through an entire investigation and see that this is not substantiated at all. And then it's, we'll go ahead and write a report to say, these were the allegations towards this particular individual. They were not substantiated. There wasn't information given to the complainants that otherwise would have given them a holistic view prior to coming to our office.
Good. Let me see if I repeat back to you what I think you said in part was, if the case might rise to the level of a criminal problem, you do or do not identify the issues to the subject.
If it rises to the level of a criminal matter, prior to interviewing any subject, we will talk to the criminal investigative entity, whether it's the state prosecutor, state's attorney's office, or anybody like that. So our office, as an administrative function, does not interfere with a potential criminal case. So we defer to whatever prosecutorial entity to see if that's something that they would like us to do or not. So to answer that question, it depends.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll have to leave it at that for the moment, unless I take up too much time here. At some point, you come to a conclusion, perhaps tentative. Do you present that conclusion in draft form or tentative form to the subject to get the subject's response?
What we present to the subject, for instance, if we did an investigation on, I'm just randomly picking DPW, we would send the entire report. Because our synopsises that are published are usually 1 or 2 pages. Our reports can be 50 to 100 pages. The entire report goes to the subject. And we give, then they would get they would let us know.
You mean the entire underlying investigative report goes to the subject?
Well,
investigation?
by subject, I'm talking about if we did an investigation of DPW, it would go to the head of DPW. Is that, we're not dealing with one person here. So for instance, if we had someone that was looking at 4,000 images of porn, we do not send him a notice saying that you were looking at 4,000 images of porn. We actually send it to the supervisor or whoever above and let them know what's happening. So we don't.
You've already, that's fine. That's good. Thank you. You've already said that you have a public synopsis and then you have an underlying quite lengthy investigative report.
Right.
To whom do you send the investigative report? The investigative
we send
report.
the report to the solicitor, we send the report to the mayor, and we send the report to the subject, whoever is the department. For instance, if it's under the mayor's department, we would send it to DPW or to the police or whoever.
And is it the final form or final report, investigative report that you send, or is it a draft or a tentative report?
Final report.
All right, let me keep moving here. You've already indicated that you've got a management information system, and I'm not going to ask you the details of it because I wouldn't understand your answer. But essentially, what do you put into your information system in a general sense? Everything or only certain things?
Usually it's everything.
Okay.
We'd like to have
does that leave it in a state where it's easily retrievable, or at least retrievable?
Yes, but only for our office. I mean, it has a very strong firewall, of course.
Right. Good.
Documents, pictures, videos, tape recordings, all of that.
Good. What are the confidentiality rules that you observe?
If someone asks to be well, actually, everybody that gets hired here has to sign a non-disclosure, realizing that you work for the Office of the Inspector General. So we, including our interns, and we have that to start, and then everything that happens in this office is considered confidential because, and we give complainants the opportunity to choose to be anonymous or, choose to disclose who they are. And like we had mentioned earlier with referrals, we won't even send a referral till we reach back to the complainant to make sure they're okay with us doing that, because we consider the confidentiality of what happens in this office utmost so that the citizens will trust the integrity of our process.
Okay, if you keep the identity of the complainant confidential, what else do you keep confidential?
I mean, other than, okay, for instance, when we're doing, all subject names are confidential. When we're doing an investigation, I'm neither confirmed nor denied during the entire time of an investigation that it's even going on. And
After it's concluded?
I don't say anything till after it's concluded.
No, no. Do you confirm or deny it after the investigation is concluded?
Well, after it would be concluded, we would have issued a report. So then we
Do you ever find that there was no waste, fraud, or abuse?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we
Do
saved a few people's jobs.
you issue a report saying that?
I have. There's a
In
front page.
in all cases that you found no waste, fraud, or abuse, you send a report out?
Michelle, do you know the answer to that one?
So this is a process that we're starting to evaluate. We actually just sent one to the MBU office under the law department. There were allegations of fraud in that. We did not find fraud at all, but we did see that there may be some room for some tightening of internal controls. So that's one thing that we're starting to do. Previously, we would have internal reports that were closure memos. So we would document the investigative steps that we took to evaluate a specific complaint. And then we established that the complaint was unfounded. We would draft it up, write it up as if it was a report of investigation, but it would stay here, and we didn't want to, as I brought the information to the Inspector General and Yvonne, the DIGA, I said, I don't necessarily want the information to die here because people think that there are potential issues because of a lack of either communication or internal controls. So now what we're starting to do is to go ahead and draft those up, have unsubstantiated claims, but still share that information with agencies.
But prior to this, you haven't done that?
Not prior to this last one. That's just the one that I remember that because it went out maybe a week or two ago, but we have done it previously, but it's something that we will continue to do and mandate.
Right. In all cases in which you find no fraud, waste, or abuse, do you tell the subject of your investigation that that is so?
They may not even realize they were the subject of our investigation.
Right. Now, as to
So actually, the
investigation,
answer is definitely no.
okay, as to investigations that are concluded, do you consider all of the facts and details relating to that investigation confidential?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Under the charter, Section 5, the Office of Inspector General may establish by rule or regulation administrative and operational procedures. Have you promulgated such regulations?
Yep, that's the 92 pages I told you about.
And is that publicly available?
No. But we were talking about that we're going to be reviewing it and seeing what we can put on the website. Because we try to be as transparent as possible.
Well, the first question is, have you promulgated a regulation which would require under the APA a public disclosure and comment period? Have you gone through that process?
What's the ATA?
APA, Administrative Procedures Act.
Oh.
Right. Chairman Shea, I will just let you know that I've been speaking with Victor Turvala in the Law Department and two personnel in Legislative Reference. And after speaking with them, we've been advised to make regulations of the new whistleblower policy, because that was advanced, I guess, went into effect last year. And that we did not have to do it for our internal policies. So I was trying to get clarification. So we already have a draft of the whistleblower.
Right, there are two different things, and I'm going to touch on each of them. One is as to the Inspector General's office generally, your administrative and operational procedures, which apparently you have in writing. Have you published them outside of your office?
We were told Yvonne was saying we were told that we did not have to publish them outside the office.
And therefore you have not.
Right, under advice from the
No,
auditors.
So I just want to clarify that we do not have to put those into our new APA, I guess they're COMAR type regulations.
I understand all that. I'm just asking
Okay.
whether you have published
That
them.
we have not
The answer is
published them
you have
yet,
not.
yes.
Okay. Now, as to the whistleblower regulations, the city code says that the rules and regulations must be adopted under the APA. And that's what you're telling me you're in the process of doing now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I have just a couple questions about your budget. And the first relates to Anthony McCarthy. Is he employed still with the OIG's office?
No, Anthony actually left the office because he got a job. He's now one of the name co-hosts on WEAA, I believe. So he got his dream job, so he left.
Okay. So what was his job?
Oh, he was our PIO.
And for how long did he serve in that position?
Probably about 2 months.
During 2020?
Nope.
2021?
Yeah.
Okay. At your budget hearing, has he been replaced? Is there anybody who's taken his position?
Well, we actually evaluated it, and we decided that we need, with our pending cases, we're actually going to let that position be a special agent position.
But it's not been filled yet?
We are interviewing as we speak.
Good. Is that the one vacant position that you had when we were reviewing the budget?
When we were reviewing the budget, that was a different position, and that one is filled. But we currently have 2 openings in the special agent position.
Okay, well, when I looked at your budget, there were 18 positions, 17 filled, 1 vacant.
But that one was filled.
All right. Are any of those 18 positions this replacement for McCarthy?
Yes, that is the special agent position, and we've hired 1 person for that too.
All right, again, let me try my question again. I didn't make it clear enough. When we reviewed your budget a couple months ago, there were 18 positions. They were all filled except 1. You tell me that that has been filled. That means there are 8.
Yes, that is now filled by Tiana Bond, who works. Yeah.
Okay, well, you don't have to tell me who.
She's a secretary, so it's okay.
All right. Is Anthony McCarthy's replacement destined to be one of those 18, or is that an additional position?
No, it's one of the 18. Yvonne's actually the PR person. Yvonne.
Okay, so that means you have to wait for one of the 17 to leave before you can fill the McCarthy position.
Well, no, when as of right now, Chairman Shea, we did make a job offer for a special agent. He has accepted. So before he accepted this job, we had 3 vacant special agent positions, including the one that Anthony McCarthy had held.
Okay. So they became vacant.
Yes.
Okay.
After that budget hearing, but at that time they were filled.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, Inspector General Cumming, during the City Council hearing, there were questions about your salary that you answered. And I just want to make sure I have it straight. How did your salary increase come about? and when?
Let's see. The letter I got concerning my salary was September 18th, 2020,
And from whom was the letter?
from the Chief of Staff of the Mayor,
And his or her name is?
Kim Morton.
And did the letter describe to you how it was that you were getting an increase in salary?
Yes, the letter said, after an annual assessment of agency directors, it was discovered that your classification-based salary was not in alignment with your peers. This reclassification is granted in accordance with the provision of AM 20520 for internal alignment with your reclassification and represented in the increase in your base salary.
Do you know whether there were any other classifications reclassified or any other job positions reclassified at that time?
I did not research that.
Did you have any discussions with Kim Morton about the reclassification of your job?
No, I actually did. I sent a letter to Solicitor Moore at the time, Solicitor Moore, letting her know, because I didn't have a board and I didn't want any questions about it, that I let her know that I received this letter, and I can read it to you if you want me to.
No, I think you read it into the record, or you gave us a copy. So that's fine. So you inform Solicitor Moore. Anyone else?
Well, obviously, HR must, HR,
Did you discuss it with anybody at HR?
I can't remember. I probably discussed it with Quentin.
Was there anybody other than any entity other than HR maybe, or the solicitor who approved the reclassification? Let me
I
frame
didn't
it up.
ask for a reclassification.
I understand that.
Okay, when
Did
I was
the-
working
did the
at
board-
WMATA, I actually took a 35% pay cut to come here. So I did not think it was that unusual that I received an increase.
Did the Board of Estimates consider your reclassification?
I presume they did because I got this letter from the Chief of Staff. I don't know.
Okay. I came today, well, let me ask just one or two quick questions, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. Do you supervise the ethics part of your office? Is that under your supervision?
Jeff Hofstadler does work in my office, and well, we work on some issues. Sometimes, though, there's firewalls between what he has to do and what I have to do.
And what
I really
criteria,
can't discuss that with you.
well, what are the criteria by which you erect those firewalls?
It would be a discussion between him and I about whether it's something that would be something that we should do that with.
But I'm asking what the factors are that would cause you to erect a firewall. Can you identify them?
I can put Jeff on next time we talk, and he can discuss it.
Okay.
Probably a conflict of interest.
Who supervises in our system the Inspector General, himself or herself?
Who supervises the Inspector General?
Yes.
Well, and according to the law, it's supposed to be an advisory board.
But heretofore, has that happened?
Well, I've always worked very closely with the former solicitors. I think it would be a really good idea if you brought in, for instance, Andre Davis Dana more to talk to this group about, especially about my performance and everything, because I worked for Judge Andre Davis the longest, and I think he would actually probably enjoy having an opportunity to talk to you about all the different matters that we had to work together on.
So I talked to Judge Davis. He's terrific in every way. I completely agree with you.
He really is.
But did he supervise you?
It's more of, I mean, I'm in an article in the city code, Article 10 is the Inspector General. And I guess it's an article is the mayor, the council. So, I mean, I have an advisory board.
I was asking about Judge Davis. Judge Davis was politically appointed, wasn't he?
He was politically appointed by, just because something was done some way in the past doesn't mean it's the right way to do something. But yes, he was politically appointed.
Right. Now, I came today, and I think I've been faithful to it, to conduct as best I can a performance review and not debate the makeup of this board. But let me ask you just one question. Before your letter of July 9th, 2021, had you ever challenged the makeup of the advisory board?
Yes.
To whom and when?
Well, when we first started, I remember we were actually bringing forth the law, and because the law was written before I started, and there were actually two of them written. There was one written by Jim Smith, and there was one written by Ryan Dorsey, because one was like the Pew one, and one was the City Council one. And everybody was like, Isabel, you've got to pick one or the other, because I'm not a political person. So I am for independence. So I am for whatever's independent. So, and that ended up, as everybody said, that the Jim Smith one was the one that was going to be the definite one, but that ended up not being the case. So instead what happened was, and then, you know, I then had to go to a BOE meeting. And at the BOE meeting, I remember saying, you know, when you actually read this, that I'm reporting to one political person, and now I'm reporting to 4 political persons. I go, how is this better? And I was told, it's a stepping stone, Isabel. It's a stepping stone. The most important thing is we need to get independence with the Office of the Inspector General. And that made perfect sense to me, because anybody that can read it, I mean, here we're promoting independence for this office, but what we're promoting is political independence.
Okay, that's terrific, and I appreciate it. I don't mean to cut you off, but in the interest of time, let me just finish by saying, if you would provide us with written or recorded statements by you criticizing the makeup of this board, I, for one, would appreciate it.
There aren't any, because this board had never met prior to this. So how could I criticize or discuss something that I really didn't have an opportunity to? In fact, I didn't even know who was on this board, because I've never gotten a notice officially that, you know, there is who was on the board. So I've been waiting patiently for this board to meet so that this can all be discussed.
Okay. Well,
I'm not asking for anything that isn't best practices throughout the United States or best practices.
The simple request is, please send me any written documentation.
Except when I was except for when I was in Atlanta, and I remember they asked, how is that a independent board? And I said, well, you're right, it kind of makes sense, but they've never met.
Okay, I think I've made my request clear enough. I've hogged the time.
I'm telling you, there is nothing in writing.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you on the last.
Said there's nothing in writing.
Okay. Now, let me
now though.
Councilman Costello for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions, but I wanted to follow up on a couple of the questions that you had asked. And you all can hear me okay, correct? Thank you. Madam Inspector General, thank you for being here with us today, along with your senior team. I heard you mention the CMTS. That's the Case Management and Tracking System, correct?
Yes,
And that's like a investigative case management system, essentially like a records management system, correct?
yep, yes, it is.
Thank you. And is there you had mentioned uploading different pieces of evidence, whether it's audio interviews or documentation. Is there a retention policy for documents that are or other things that are uploaded to that system?
Michelle, can you answer that one?
There is not a written retention policy. We talked to the Baltimore City Archivist regarding our retention of our evidence, but as of right now, we just keep everything.
Got it. Thank you. And then earlier in the meeting today, I think Miss Phillips, you had talked about the process by which a case is initiated, right? And like the complaint comes in, and then there's a review, and then you guys kind of figure out next steps. Is that process itself for the initiation of an investigation, is that documented in the 92-page policy and procedure manual that the Inspector General referenced earlier?
Yes, sir, it is.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, that's all I had on follow-up from Chairman Shea. And then my two questions, the first one is around peer review. You had mentioned that you had reached out, I believe it's the Association of Inspector Generals, AIG, to conduct a peer review of this office. Is that correct?
Correct.
And do you know when that peer review is set to commence?
Yes. You can't request a peer review till you have 3 years worth of, you've actually worked in an office for 3 years. So we didn't hit that until January. So we requested the peer review, and I think we officially requested it in April. And we are scheduled for, I believe, August of next year.
Okay, so essentially that's a review of the prior 3 years of investigatory work that the office has done, correct?
Correct.
And do we know how that the actual peer reviewer is assigned? Is it just the AIG will assign another comparable sized agency?
Well, what happens is it's a team, and they actually come from all over the United States, and they do have them by different size groups, and then we will have to pay to put them up, and they will come in and they will do a detailed review. It usually takes between 3 and 5 days for them to do their entire review. We had the same thing when we worked at WMATA. Peer reviews are very important.
Okay, so it's
I was
not
really looking forward to hitting the 3-year mark.
okay, so it's not a comparable agency. I'm just going to throw out a city, for example, the Cleveland. It's not like the Cleveland OIG that comes in to conduct the peer review. It's a group of certified IGs that the AIG assigns to send in, correct?
It's a peer review team, because like you can't take like Chicago, you can't take just a team from one group. You have to. I mean, there's people that have been trained in how to do peer reviews.
Okay. And does anyone on your staff participate in peer reviews of other agencies as part of one of those teams?
Well, we're going to have to now because we are getting one. And I had actually participated in it when I was at WMATA. I actually helped coordinate the entire peer review for the one at WMATA. So
Got it. So it's safe to say it's essentially a trade-off, right? If Baltimore City has the peer reviewers come in we in turn need to volunteer some of our staff for, X number of hours or days to be available to participate in that pool of peer reviewers, if you will, at some point in the future, correct?
Yeah, but you have to be trained in, it's a process. It's all part of the certification process. It's all part of the standards. It's all part of the whole process.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then my second set of questions revolves around what I'll refer to as the agency comment process. I know that Chairman Shea had kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. I wanted to delve into a little more detail. So I think we may have used the term subject interchangeably a little bit at the beginning, in that for example, it could be a specific person within the Department of Transportation or the agency as a whole. I want to focus on the agency as a whole, where that is the, I want to use the term subject, but the focus of the complaint, if you will. So once a draft report is completed, and let's use a hypothetical example that it's the Department of Transportation, is there a what is sent to the Department of Transportation before you publish the report? Like how does that, like, walk me through the process of, please walk me through the process of, you have a draft work product through publishing of that product.
Michelle, do you want to take this one?
Once an investigative report has been reviewed and finalized by the Inspector General, then an agency report will go to whomever oversees that agency. So if, like you said, DOT, I'm unsure of who it is now. I know there's been some reconfiguration with this administration, but it may go directly to the city administrator, because if there is a procedural process issue that could result in fraud, waste, and abuse that may be at the helm of the Department of Transportation's director, hypothetically speaking, then that means that that individual supervisor would need to go look into, review, investigate, and things of that nature. So it would go above that individual to go ahead and look at those particular controls or lack thereof, potentially that the OIG investigation and or report may or may not have found.
That's helpful context. I fear that I may have asked the question the wrong way, so please allow me to ask it differently. Before a report is finalized, so I'm kind of talking maybe two or three steps back before what you just described. Before a report is finalized, do you give the agency that is the focus of the report an opportunity to comment on that draft report prior to publishing it, so that they can verify information that is produced in that draft report, which will eventually become final?
Do we give them the opportunity to review the draft report prior to finalization? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary of the question. Yes, ma'am.
As the policy stands right now, no, we do not.
Has there been any discussion of changing that policy?
We do give everybody the final report, and we publish their responses in the report and the public synopsis.
I appreciate that. I don't think that's but that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about, do agencies have an opportunity to review the report prior to it being finalized? And I think what I'm hearing Ms. Phillips say is no, they do not. Is that correct?
The final internal report that is released, no. We have had discussions and have started to corroborate with individual agencies when it comes to public synopsises. So I don't necessarily think that that is something that we cannot discuss.
Okay, so and when the report is finalized, there's a longer report with detail. Maybe it's 50 pages, and then there's a public synopsis, which is a summary of it, which is, let's say, for the sake of conversation, 5 pages. What is provided to the agency? Just that 5-page report, or also the 50-page report?
Right, the 50-page report is sent to the agency. They can then get three to 4 weeks to respond to us. And then at that point in time, then once we get the response, only then is a public synopsis even generated. And then and sometimes if they've written a public synopsis that may include, if they've written a response that may include names, we always let people know, well, we're going to be publishing the response.
Okay, please allow me to summarize what I think I understand the process to be. Case is initiated, investigative work is conducted, report is drafted, report is finalized internally, the 50-page report. 50-page report after it's finalized internally is provided to the agency who is the focus of that report. They are provided 3 to 4 weeks to comment on that. And then once they provide their comments to the OIG, then a synopsis is created, which is a plus or minus 5-page summary of that 50-page report, and will reprint as an appendix that 1 or 2-page letter from the agency in response to their review of that finalized 50-page report. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Only one other question, and this is for you, Mr. Chairman. The 92-page policy and procedure manual and understanding the APA regulations in the city. Is that manual something that would be appropriate for this board to have access to review? I think you're on mute, Mr. Chair.
I would have to discuss that with the Inspector General, see what her thoughts are on it, and if she has concerns, whether they can be accommodated in some fashion. So I really don't know the answer to that right now.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask that you consider that request, and I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Michael Huber, Chief of Staff Huber, you have questions?
Mr. Chair, I will defer to other members, and if there's time permitting, come back at the end.
Okay. Ms. McClamey?
I do have a couple of questions.
Please.
For the Inspector General, one, can you tell us a little bit about, I noticed in the reports, it talks about the return on investment, monies that are saved because of investigations, et cetera. Does that include also any recovered or monies that are reimbursed to the city?
Vaughn, do you want to take that one?
No, for the FY21, it does not. We have not had a case yet where we have been able to seek restitution or get a claim maybe through the law department. We've just identified, and that's why I keep it like that, identified waste or savings in that respect.
And if I'm understanding your responses earlier, based on how you've been able to reclassify positions, there's no longer a need for an additional position?
So when, I guess, are you, Madam Deputy, are you referring to the budget hearing where we're talking about this particular position being reclassified?
So I believe in one of the communiques, there was a request for a budget enhancement, which would, you're requesting an additional position. Is there no longer a need now since you've been able to reclass, I'm assuming, a position?
No, so we never reclassified that particular position. Those are the
Okay.
positions that we had going in. And so, yes, the original budget proposal that I'd submitted for FY22, it did ask for an additional person. So that is outside of it. But we're working with what we have right now and may put forth the proposal for next FY for an additional position.
And just one last question. I know we talked a little bit about the duties and how they may be different from other OIGs based on how the city has already is constructed in terms of having a separate Department of Audits. Earlier, you were talking, the Inspector General was referencing the various agencies that OIG office coordinates with. Can you also talk a little bit about any coordination with the Department of Audits?
That's a great question. When most inspector general offices have an audit function, but here in Baltimore City, we have such a strong audit with, I mean, there's more people, as you well know, in the audit group than we have in my whole office. So with the limited resources, and it was specifically, every mention of the word audit was actually struck from the law before I came. Okay, so it was never going to be, there was never going to be audit incorporated into the office of the inspector general. Okay, that was not going to happen. But we have worked with the controller's office when we have cases that we know that there's a situation that we need the type of expertise that Josh Pash has, the city auditor. We've reached out to the comptroller and asked to work with them. We've worked to, we had several people in our office from the comptroller's office that actually to develop the best procedures. We would work with them with what we found in our investigation to try to help them in their audit. So that's a really good example where we've actually worked together to try to help, find situations where monies could be more accountable to the citizens. Did I answer that okay? It's hard to hear you too for some reason.
I'm not sure what, I apologize, but I'm not sure what the problem is. I believe you answered the question. I know there's some, in the Department of Audits, there is a function in reference to a fraud hotline, but I do know there's collaboration and coordination along with, I guess, pretty much would be performance audits as well. But yeah, she answered the question. Thank you.
Great, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Controller. Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the team for just really taking the time to help us to understand your office. Mr. Chair, you really did a very thorough questioning of, I guess, the internal vetting process, and some of my questions were phrased about that as well. Answered a lot of those questions. And then also just recently the question about, applying standards to audits. That has been answered. I'm just kind of going down the list. Inspector Cummings, you did mention you have 5 current employees, inspectors, correct? Was that 5?
Special agents.
Special agents. What's the average caseload of each investigator or special agent? What's their average caseload?
I'll let Michelle answer that because
Okay.
she oversees that.
So as of right now, all of our agents have between 5 to 7 active and open investigations. We go ahead and prioritize based on largest financial need or a lack of internal controls that may potentially affect the city in a larger light. So that's where they are.
Okay. How much of your office budget goes towards personnel costs? Just a ballpark percentage.
Yvonne, can you answer that one? I think it's 90. You're mute, Yvonne.
Oh, my apologies, Madam Vice President. I would say it would be the majority of our budget. One of the things I did do and try to prepare for this meeting is forgot to break those 2 portions down. But I will say that
ballpark figure was she correct? About 90%?
95, Yvonne. It's a lot.
it is a lot. I would probably say maybe close to 90. The second part of it would be, because I will tell you now that the other part would be professional services and software and service training, and that's probably only going to amount to maybe 100 or 150,000, maybe.
Okay. Thank you for that. And you did cover, I think when you had the conversation about the Department of Human Resources and the actual actual position of special agent. And I guess just to add to that, do you have a large turnover of special agents, or have you had a large turnover, or is it just you are continually growing?
I can, so when it comes just to special agents, Madam Vice President, in that
Yes.
role, I will say it is sometimes difficult to find people with investigative experience that this office needs, and our standards are quite high. We have no problem training anyone that may possess investigative instinct, and usually we'll try to vet that out by providing a written practical during right after we interview them, just to assess. It's really to assess a little bit of their writing skills and their investigative instinct. Unfortunately, we really can't compete because we're in Baltimore City, and Washington, D.C. is just kind of a hop, skip, and away by train or even car sometimes, and their salaries are really just through the roof. So we've been trying to be creative in how we hire. We'll look at people from insurance investigators, maybe writers from, I would think it's interesting to get writers from newspapers maybe, just for that writing and investigative instinct. There have been times where we'll hire on people, we think they have a lot of potential, we put a lot of training in, and it doesn't work out. The investigative instinct is just not there. So has there been a little bit of turnover because of that? Absolutely.
Okay. And then just lastly, and I know the chairman had kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'll just phrase it a little different. If there was an administrative policy or criminal law violation pertaining to the operations of your office, who would be responsible for conducting that investigation?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
If there was an administrative policy or criminal law violation pertaining to the operation of your office, who would be responsible for conducting that investigation?
We would probably, it's a good question. I'm going to get back to you on that one because I just don't know offhand.
Sure. Okay. And then you mentioned about Ms. Brooks had mentioned about training and so on. So I appreciate that it's continual training as you move forward with your office. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I turn to Dean Tobin, and lest the law professors think I did this unfairly, we did it in alphabetical order other than myself. So Dean Tobin, you're up.
Thank you, Chairman Shea. I appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to be here and be able to meet as a board, and welcome to the Inspector General. So I'd like to just, similar to Chairman Shea, and I think a lot of us have some just understanding and learning about the Inspector General's office. So is there a statement of best practices? Are there a set of best practice rules and regulations for Inspector Generals? And do we follow and incorporate those best practices?
That's an excellent question. And I think that we have standards. We have the Green Book standards, which we are mandated to follow as certified Inspector Generals. And we, as a group, as the Association of Inspector Generals, there are best practices. And I know that when, for instance, when Atlanta was actually trying to form their Office of the Inspector General, they actually hired, and they had a blue ribbon panel that actually did the whole investigation, and they actually presented an entire consulting type thing that actually went through the best practices. And I only say this because they spent like a tremendous amount of money, and it was actually published about some of the best practices for an Inspector General's office. And it was actually that was one of the opportunities that I really had the opportunity to learn a lot about what's considered the best practices throughout. And with the Association of Inspector Generals, the whole, I know that that's an excellent way to get the practices throughout the United States, and they actually evaluated the different agencies and that type of thing. So it's, is there an actual book per se called best? We just have this, the green book, what we call it, which is the standards and what lays out, how to do evaluations, how to do auditing, how to do that type of thing.
So there's an Association of Inspector Generals, right? I just want to make sure I'm following through. There's an Association of Inspector Generals, right, that you all belong to.
Yes, in fact, Yvonne is actually in Jacksonville right now becoming a certified inspector general. And Michelle is a certified inspector general investigator. And
so that organization has something called a green book that is basically a guide to how to do investigations in a best practice way, how to run the office in a best practice way, how to maintain confidentiality. Is that a fair, the disadvantage or advantage of being on remote is I'm probably going to be able to Google Green Book and AIG very quickly, but
Yes.
Good. Please do.
Actually, Dean Tobin, I sent it to you. It's in
I
your.
said I could send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, he
So,
already has it.
Okay.
I do have it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
So that's what made me think there was one. So in, there is a little bit of making sure you know a little bit about what you're talking about before you ask questions. So there is this book, or green book as you call it, that indicates some of the best practices. How much do our practices align with the sort of best practices of inspector generals? And I certainly understand that federal ones are different than state ones, that may be different than city ones, that may, but how are we aligning our operations with what would be considered best practices?
Well, we are, that's what we strive for. We strive to follow the Green Book. And that was one of the big issues at one point, that some people believed we followed the Yellow Book. And state and local inspector generals actually follow the Green Book. And we try within our own procedures here to always follow and make sure that we are maintaining their standards. And one of the first standards of the Green Book is independence. That's the one of the primary focus.
Okay, I don't want to be controversial or anything else, but I do want to make sure that I don't take too much time in these kinds of things. So I do think that one of the things that would be helpful for us as a board is, I understand independence is important. I'm going to get there in a minute. And as I understand it, there's two versions of independence, right? There's the independence of you and your staff, making sure you're independent. And so making sure that you don't have conflicts, and also making sure that you don't allow outside interference, the same way we would ask a judge to be independent. And then there are structures of independence, right? So as I understand from looking at the Green Book and other things, you have an independent obligation as a person who is an inspector general to maintain independence. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. And so if somebody is trying to interfere with you, wanting you to do something that you're not supposed to do, you say, I can't do that. That's inappropriate for an IG. Right?
That's correct.
Okay. And so that's one type of independence. Then the second type of independence is structural independence, right? It's that first call that might come from someone to try to influence you. Their power to influence might be changed based on their position, right? And so that's an independence that's a structural independence. Would you agree with that?
And that's really the most important. It's none of us really matter. It's the fact that it's the positions, the inspector general, the mayor, the city council.
So I would like to assert that it matters a lot. I mean, and I'm not questioning it. In fact, I'm complimenting it. Your moral independence, the independence of your team, the fact that they're doing this work because they believe that this is important for the city, and you have pride in what you do. There's a part of personal. You might get fired for your independence, and that might be what you're worried about. But that independence comes from your independence as a moral person doing an ethical job. That was an easy yes, right? I mean,
I was trying to get the question. Was there a question in there?
well, you were you were sort of saying that the people don't matter. I think the people, I think
No, no,
ethical
no, no,
values
no,
in the people
no.
are
I'm
essential.
saying
Right?
that we're all interchangeable. I'm saying that, for instance, myself, I have been through 3 mayors, 3 council presidents, 2 comptrollers, and three solicitors. So what I'm saying is the people, you can't take this personally. I'm trying to fight for what's best for the city in the future.
Right. So I don't take anything personally. I
Good.
guess what I'm saying is the person matters, you matter, and
Of
that
course
just
I
as
know.
with a judge, you want individuals in your office and you to be exercising independence and be morally understand that that's an important role of the inspector general. So I think that's an
Absolutely.
important recognition. Okay. So thank you. That's all I needed. So the next step in that is what, and I understand, Chairman Shea, you're looking at me like, where am I going? That we don't want to talk too much about this, but I do want to move a little further, because I think it is important in some of these discussions, and then I hope we won't have them at the board level anymore. I think one of the main functions of this board is to respect and support the independence of the inspector general. I think you can't have a good inspector general's office unless you have confidence that that inspector general can operate independently. I think that's one of my core values, and it should be a core value of this committee. I do, and Chairman Shea was trying to talk about it a little bit. Prior to the change in composition, doesn't mean we can't be better. Prior to the change in composition, as I understand it, the inspector general either reported to the solicitor general, the state solicitor, or to the mayor. Is that correct?
The past inspector generals have reported to the mayor, and when I was hired, I think my line was actually the solicitor.
Okay, thank you. And so I think the movement to a board, if there are 7 of us and we're in public in a lot of these ways, it is certainly harder for there to be political pressure put on the IG or any of her staff from a broader board, right? If you work right for the mayor, that's a little more tough than if there are 7 of us.
Actually, people that I have to investigate shouldn't be judged, there's very little
Okay.
independence with that.
So there was no independent. I mean, that was one of the problems that I think people were looking at when the mayor was supervising this person, right? The IG could potentially have to investigate the mayor, right?
So have I.
Okay, so there was a movement away from that to a broader group who, of course, could potentially recuse. I guess we can't recuse if we don't know we're being investigated. But of course, if we don't know we're being investigated, we can't really be influencing the investigation. So there's some level where there's some protection based on that move. But I think what I would like to say on that point before I move on is, from my perspective, the city council and the people of Baltimore made a decision to move the inspector general's office for more independence. Whether they got it right or not, the city council and the people of Baltimore can decide. But really what we should think about, our obligation is to promote an independent IG, to do some type of review. Unlike Baltimore County, I think, we have no review of your individual cases. So I want to make sure I'm clear that that's right? No one from this board has the authority to go and ask about, unless they have it in another place, to ask about a particular investigation, right?
I really don't know because this committee's never met before. I don't know what I don't know what policies and procedures. I don't know.
Okay. All right, that's fair. So when I was looking at these principles, you really couldn't find much on sort of the independence angle, and I care about that very much. So I guess there is a principles and standards for external impairments that comes from this group, the Association of Inspector Generals. And one of the things they say is there shouldn't be interference or undue interference in the selection, appointment, and employment of OIG staff. So I assume that nobody from this board has intervened in the hiring or selection of your staff. You pick your staff independently. Is that correct?
Board had never met before this, so.
I understand that. My question is, not whether we've met.
How could you have interfered because they never met?
Well, I could call you and I could say,
But you weren't on this committee till May.
all right, we're gonna get to that in a minute. So the chair, if the chair called you and said, I want you to hire my brother, as you know, that could have happened even if the group had not met yet, right? I'm not trying to be difficult here. This is the we haven't met, but that didn't mean people didn't exist, right? I mean,
I didn't know you were going to be on it.
You sent me an email on October 8th, 2019 that said, Dear distinguished member of the advisory board, here's our annual report.
Right.
So you must have thought, I mean, at that time, at least, it turns out we clarified we weren't on the board because we hadn't been appointed. But
Right.
you thought we were on the board, or you thought
trying to get this board to
you thought that it existed, right? I mean, you sent me an email with the report in 2019.
I read the law, and the law
Right.
said that. So I mean, I
Right.
tried.
So I actually saw that as a positive.
I'm not trying to fight you.
I saw that as a positive. I saw that as you're trying to comply with the rules and to send them out. So I saw that this is not a negative to me. It's a positive.
I don't think it's a negative.
But I'm saying this idea that there couldn't, I mean, when I asked you if people have interfered, how come the answer just isn't no? No one's interfered. Instead of we couldn't because the board hasn't met. We could have. I asked you, just this is the standards and principles. It says, has anybody tried to do undue influence in the selection appointment of your staff? I assume the answer to that was going to be an easy no.
Yeah, I've never let the board know anything about my staff.
Okay, so no one on the board has interfered in your appointment or selection of people. Have people tried to restrict your funds in a way that could prevent you from performing your essential work?
I could always use more funds.
Sure. What we don't want, and what somebody like a board is trying to do, is to make sure that someone doesn't zero out funds because they're unhappy with you. Right. That's part of what I see as our charge. I don't see that as having happened. All right, I'm not gonna continue this because I'm wasting other people's time. But there are these external impairments. There are 6 factors that are listed in those external impairments in the OIG report. If you feel like some of those impairments are occurring, I would be interested in knowing. I mean, as I said, this is not. I'm not sure why this has been this difficult, because I thought we were just going to confirm the importance of certain things that were ensuring your independence.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you being on this.
The other
so it's a pleasure.
The other comment, I just wanted to clarify that Chairman Shea had talked about, because I've seen this happen a fair amount in other instances, and I think this is what he was trying to get at. What happens when you receive a frivolous claim? When you receive a claim that's either not intended, intended to be vindictive, or is a person who, maybe is a little doesn't have the cognitive reality of the world. Many of us in different places have gotten those letters that are concerned about, someone controlling their mind or something like that. I mean, what do you do with something comes in and it just doesn't seem legitimate? What happens with that kind of claim?
I'll let Michelle answer that because she runs the hotline.
So we have received complaints in that nature. Somebody may say the mayor put a spaceship over top of my house and, they're spying on me. You guys need to take a look at that. Clearly that is not true. So we'll go ahead. We have trained hotline special agents to ensure that they communicate with these individuals, because they're still people, and we talk to them. We let them know, we understand that you feel as though you have valid concerns, but this falls outside of our purview. We do suggest outside agencies, we'll refer them to Department of Health, and things of that nature. So we do have the option to do informal referrals. I think this is something that was brought up earlier. Everything isn't a written referral. Sometimes, we'll say, hey, there's a pothole. Absolutely. Please call 311, or you can reach out to DOT. I'll notate that communication in the CMTS system so that that dialogue is notated in there, and that if anybody has a question, oh, they just did this, was my complaint. Absolutely not. We called back, gave them an appropriate resource, and then went on ahead, closed it on our end, and let them know that.
Excellent. I appreciate that. That sounds completely rational, and I appreciate that. That clarifies sort of how I was thinking. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Dean Weiss?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try and be brief as I'm, I guess, the last of the members of the board to speak. First of all, thank you very much, Inspector General Cumming, for your presentation and the information you provided. I'll put something on the record that I did when this board last met, but I think we have a somewhat wider public audience. You are a graduate of the law school, at which I'm dean, the University of Baltimore School of Law. We're proud of your professional accomplishments. And for a time, you were an active member of the Law School Advisory Council. But when I was appointed to this board, you and I decided, and Chairman Shea and I agreed, that you should step back to eliminate that other professional interaction that we would have, and enable me to serve my role here without that having any role whatsoever. So just for the record, that was the case, but you're no longer a member of that council. Like Dean Tobin, I guess law school deans think alike, my thought goes immediately to the Green Book. That is to say, we're not here to review individual cases. We're here to make sure that the operation of your office is consistent with accepted standards and best practices for inspectors general around the country. We were provided a copy of a report from the Able Foundation in 2017. So this is before your time as Inspector General, before the current law that governs you. And that report found significant deficiencies in the operation of not so much the operation of the office, but the structure of the office as it was established by a then executive order in the city. And it really does a nice job of lining up the Green Book requirements with what was the structure, and it outlined the deficiencies. So I am comforted now, 4 years later, you say that you strive to comply with the Green Book. And I take it you think that you largely achieved that. Your office is either adhering to best practices or striving to reach those. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I'm also comforted to hear that the Association of Inspectors General is sending a review team per your request next year that will provide an outside assessment of the extent to which your office complies with the standards in the Green Book. Is that right?
That's correct.
So that's good. We're gonna get there. That's where we need to be. It sounds like you've taken important steps to get us there, and then the AIG team will say if there are other things we should do. And certainly one of the factors will be this independence question. And if the Association of Inspectors General shares concerns about the structure here, then the City Council and the voters could consider modification of the current structure. But for now, I know that all members of this board will strive to not compromise your independence, because we're here to support your independence. So with that kind of big picture overview of what we're doing here, I'm satisfied that we're in the right direction here. Look forward to further review that's appropriate, not of individual cases, but of structure. And I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dean Weiss. Mr. Huber, you had indicated that you wanted to reserve. I don't know what our TV capacity is for how much longer, but if you'd like to take some time, certainly you're welcome to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I expect I'll be brief. And we'll be brief, although I want to just quickly remark, Madam Inspector General, that how much I appreciate you taking the time to meet with this board. As I've said, as you've heard me say, as you've heard the mayor say, the mayor really supports having a strong and independent Inspector General. He views this process as integral to the strength of the Inspector General. And I personally appreciate the knowledge that we have about the way your office works. As you can see from the questions of the board members, practices of an IG's office are not universally known, whether they should be or not. And as with all all facets of city government operations, the more we know, the better. And so thank you for your time, and thank you for that, for kind of walking us through what I'm sure were some painful questions and probably some really, as the chairman said, some really elementary things. But along those lines, you've seen a lot of interest in this, the complaint process, but I want to spend some time on the decision to take a complaint that your office receives and move forward with it. And so this is going to be a little repetitive, I think, from the chairman's questions, but I promise you it's just an attempt to better understand this specific element of your office's practices. So first want to ask a question. Not all complaints are taken to full-fledged investigations. Is that right?
That's correct.
So does your office have policies that establish official criteria or elements or factors that govern the decision to take or not to take a complaint to the full-fledged investigations, through to a full-fledged investigation?
What Michelle had outlined earlier is the process that the whole thing takes, and that is outlined in our procedures.
And that's that internal document that we've been talking about, right?
Yes.
Are they the same set of criteria? Does your office ask itself the same set of questions for every for every complaint when assessing whether or not to take it to through to an investigation? And then and I'm not implying that those are the only questions you would ask, because as you've been at pains to point out, every case is different. But is there a core set of questions that you ask in every instance?
Like I said earlier, Michelle is the one that takes the case from the complaint to the next level, so let me defer to her on that.
So when I do get the complaints, I'll take a look, as I stated previously, I'll take a look to see first, does it fall under the Baltimore City Office of the Inspector General purview? Is there fraud, waste, and abuse easily identified in the complaint? Or is there mismanagement that could result in potential fraud, waste, or abuse in that? If it is not clear based off of the information received through the hotline, then I will take that information to the executive team and we'll discuss it a little more after we've vetted, gathered up additional information. We'll call back a complainant if we have that information and do a little bit of preliminary digging. So there are, to answer your question, there are a set of questions that I go by and say, okay, is this person a city employee or a vendor or get city funds that would give us jurisdiction? Is this fraud, waste, or abuse? So yes.
Yeah. So it's a small set of questions. So that's very helpful. Thank you. Does every complaint where you would answer that set of questions where you would answer each of them in the affirmative, do all of those go on to an investigation? Because we've also discussed in a few different contexts the capacity issues of the office.
Yes, we'll prioritize those as the Inspector General said previously, if it is a larger amount, then we'll try to go ahead and get it off the pending list. So we do have a pending list because we are only at 5 investigators. So we have to make sure that our investigators aren't burned out, but we can shuffle depending on if there is an immediate need to make sure that we stop the hemorrhaging, for lack of a better word, of potential funding within the city. So we'll go ahead and keep them at the pending status, and then we'll move them off as we continue to close out additional cases, sir.
And is there a set of criteria or questions that the office asks itself when setting that prioritization?
At our executive team meetings, we discuss that prioritization with the Inspector General, and the Inspector General will set that priority.
And what goes into that priority?
Usually it's the magnitude of the case, money being wasted, the impact it will have on the citizens, whether there's a safety concern. I mean, our cases are so varied. We put a lot of thought into everything we do.
Okay, so things like magnitude defined as the amount of money being alleged to, the amount of money alleged to being wasted. Is that what you mean by magnitude?
Yeah, Mr. Huber, I think we look at things like if there is a waste somewhere and we want to kind of, there's like bleeding, right? We want to be able to put a tourniquet on it and stop it. Alert management to say this is going on is one thing. Sometimes safety issues are another thing that lead to waste and abuse, that we try to get to those first, that need the most attention immediately. Is one of the criteria that we look at so that we can do something about it quickly, bring it to the attention of management, to the mayor's office, and say, this is, hey, look over here, this is going on. Maybe you guys can just step in and do something about it. But I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Huber, as far as the set of questions that we ask for, when we're assessing a complaint, there's really no thought out questions. It's really going to be answering the first jurisdictional question and then who, what, when, why, where, to satisfy the rest of our inquiry seeking to see if it does fall squarely into something that we're going to investigate. I can tell you there are more structured questions when it comes to whistleblower retaliation cases, because they're very specific to the law. There must be a disclosure that's fraud, waste, or abuse, health and safety. So we do have to establish that, but I did create specific questions that any investigator doing a whistleblower retaliation case must ask to see if it'll fit under the law.
Got it. Okay. And does the credibility of the allegations play a role in either the decision to move forward to an investigation or in the prioritization?
So yes, when we are looking at certain cases, and Michelle can speak on some of our investigation, I can speak on some of the whistleblower investigations that I've looked into. Yes, credibility does play a big role. Sometimes you don't see it up front. It's as you were doing the investigation, something will come up that will grab our attention. It's like, I'm not sure if this is credible information. And that's when we would make a decision on these types of cases. A lot of the work does go into preliminary inquiries, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we will have an official investigation and come across credibility issues later with witnesses. And those are noted and we take note of that.
And credibility of the evidence.
Mhm.
We're not just talking people, we're talking the evidence and what we find when doing the preliminary inquiry.
Do equity considerations factor into the decision to move to an investigation or in the prioritization of investigations?
If you could clarify in what ways?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear both questions.
I don't understand what do you mean by equity question? What does that mean?
Do do any considerations of racial equity come into these conversations that your office is having, and the decisions your office is making, and the prioritizations your office is making?
No.
And then just a couple quick questions on the constitution of the board. So this board was created by a charter amendment, right?
Yes, it was.
What year?
It was in 2000. It was in November of 2018.
And what? It was which question?
Oh, I think it was F.
Okay.
Question F.
Okay. And at the time, and you testified to the city council. So as charter amendment, it originated in the city council, right?
It was actually done prior to me being here because there were some wonderful citizen groups, Max, that did a lot of work, and they worked with Ryan Dorsey.
Yeah.
And
But it originated as legislation before the city council.
well, that was one of them, and the other one was the Jim Smith one, which originated with the mayor. I don't know if you remember that, because they were doing the whole charter review thing, and there were a whole bunch of things that happened that year with the mayor, and that whole thing got killed.
But okay, but
So
only
there
one
were bills.
went
There
on,
were two bills, is what I'm telling you.
and one went on to the ballot.
Right. That was the city council's one.
Right. So yes, it originated in the city council, and you testified in support of that legislation, right?
Yes, I did testify in support of independence.
And had you reviewed the text of the legislation before testifying in support?
I had, and I
Had you reviewed the part that laid out the makeup of this board?
yes, and I
And
thought
had you done,
then that it
and
was
then
questionable.
before, and then on your website, there's a page thanking voters and celebrating the passage of this charter amendment, right?
Without question.
No, is that right?
Let me just finish, please. I supported it. I supported it. But as time has gone on, I realized that compared to other inspector general's offices, it is not the best practices. That is what I'm trying to say. That's it. Right? We do not follow best standards by having people that are before the inspector general's cases and having elected officials on this. That's it.
Were these best practices developed after 2018?
No, I'm telling you, if you want me to say that I was wrong for supporting it, I don't know if I was, because it did get it out from the mayor. It brought it to a group. The group, I mean, I think that I supported it. However, I don't think it's right. So
Okay.
I mean, you can say.
I'm trying, as I said, I'm trying to understand. I'm not trying to
I
get
wanted independent.
anything. I'm trying to understand
Right.
the point of view. That's all that's governing these questions.
Okay, well,
And so I'll end there, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and Madam Inspector General, thank you again for your time this evening.
of
Well,
course.
I think
Thank you.
needless to say, I hope, we all thank you and your staff, very capable staff, and you obviously have put heart and soul into the job you've done. We can't do our job, and we're obligated to do it unless we understand how your office works. And I think we really understand a lot better and a lot more now than we did now an hour and some ago. So thank you for that. I think the information moves us ahead considerably, and we will now deliberate to see what, if anything, we need to do more to give you the review that the charter says we must. So with that, I thank you, and
Can I ask a question?
sure.
Like, I know I'm a MABS employee, so, I mean, am I going to get the same review that most that people get here in the city? Or are you making up a new one?
No, we're going to conform to all the rules that pertain to.
I just don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
I haven't investigated myself. We'll be sure that we do conform to that. My goal is to provide thoughtful, reflective, helpful feedback. We're not going to be able to do that unless we learn what it is you do, and that's what we tried to do today. So,
And you can always ask us for things, and if whatever I can provide, I'll be happy to. Like
terrific.
anything that during like the 25, whatever you all want, that
Okay,
I can
that's-
provide by the rules, I will be happy to.
Well, I thank you for that. That's terrific. Couldn't ask for more. All right, with that, I will sign off now. Appreciate everybody's time and attention, and thank the audience too for bearing with us. Take care.